Welcome to the February 8th, 2024 edition of CED Office Hour Live, where the CED team, which is the Community Economic Development team at Central State University and the Extension Department, connect with residents throughout the state of Ohio to resources, innovation, um, information, whether it's your personal life, your professional development, business development, or just traditional community development. And I always like to start out to define what community and economic development is, simply because it's like diversity. It's three short words, but it touches on everything, and you can talk to 10 different people and get 10 different answers, right? And that's because it's so interdisciplinary. So here on our team, we recognize community economic development as a way to look at and impact how we live, work, play, and thrive, right? And so we, on one end of the spectrum, that is the physical infrastructure kind of things, building up public spaces, parks, roadways, bikeways, um, buildings, stadiums, housing, affordable housing, all of those kind of infrastructure, hard buildings and things, material things, creative placemaking. On the other end of the spectrum is the people development, human capital, so personal, professional development, um, working to remove barriers, helping people to increase their self-sufficiency, just access to resources to do quality of life kind of things. And then in the middle is the connector. So that's the state of Ohio, Central State University, other nonprofit agencies and organizations and businesses that connect the two ends of the spectrum, right? And help make everything work. So as CED professionals, we are like system engineers. We look at that whole system and say, based on our individual skill sets, our bandwidth, our positions, how we can pick and choose what parts of that system we can impact, right? And on our team, we like to work ourselves out of a job. So when we're working with people, we want to upskill what they're doing, empower them, so they know the process improvement, and then we're out of it because it's their project. We're just kind of the facilitator or the coach. And then they come back to us with a new project and we start that all over. So that's kind of how we work. We work with the communities and organizations and businesses, so that they can reach their goals and just make our community better. And so, with us on our team today, in addition to myself, is Ambrose Moses. Ambrose, would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, just wanted to say welcome to our guest and Ambrose Moses, extension educator, and based primarily in the Central Ohio, Franklin County area.
And then I am based mainly in the bottom third of the state, running from Hamilton and Butler County, which is greater Cincinnati area, over to Scioto and Lawrence County, which is greater Portsmouth, and everything in between. I'm just going along Ohio River Valley, right? And so, as you see, this platform is online because we want to be able to reach the whole state, and our entire team is 6 people, and there's 88 counties. So this is one way that we can reach everyone. And that's basically what we do. So today's episode or segment, you've been hearing a lot about the Corporate Transparency Act, right? And but you might not know exactly the nuances of it, how it applies to your business, whether you're nonprofit or for profit. And so I reached out to Allison DeSantis, who is the Director of Business Services at the Ohio Secretary of State. And she also serves a dual role. She also serves as the Deputy Assistant to the Secretary of State. So we welcome you and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to help us navigate this Corporate Transparency Act. So now I will turn it over to you. But before we get started, real quick, can you just give us just a little snippet about yourself and how you got to this role, and what are some things that you really are proud of since being in this role, and what are some of your kind of wish list things you would like to do through the office of the Ohio Secretary of
Yeah,
State.
absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. So I've been with this office for 16 years now. And so I have seen so many changes over the years. And, one of the things that has been really exciting and fun about my role is that when I came into this office, everything was done on paper. So we had, paper filings and we were processing so much work, but we needed a lot of people to accomplish that. And over time, we've introduced online filings. And that's what keeps my job interesting and fun is that there's always something new to do. And so, I've been involved in a lot of the technology projects and I follow legislation. This being, one of the things, and it's actually the Corporate Transparency Act. It has been something that has been evolved over time, but there was an original act that was introduced in Congress in January of 2008, which was the exact month that I started with this office. That bill has not passed and it changed, every year, but got reintroduced and eventually passed here. So, those are the things that are fun for me is that, there's always something new to address. But moving forward, our office is still focused on how do we help businesses? And that's something that's really been important to Secretary LaRose is we're not just the record keeper anymore. That was our kind of main function was taking business filings, processing them, displaying them in our business search. But it's more than that. It's connecting people to the resources that they need and groups like this to, to help them grow their business. So that's kind of our goals moving forward. But as you said, there's been so much discussion on the Corporate Transparency Act. So I'm glad to have the opportunity to talk to you guys about it today. And see if we can help kind of give some clarity. And I know that there's probably a lot of questions. So I'll be glad to kind of go through that. I'm an attorney, so that's kind of how I started with the office. Was the legal counsel, to the business services division. And so, my kind of disclaimer here is that that this is the presentation today. I want to give you the general information and help you figure out which resources that you can go to and how you can get the answers to your questions. I won't touch on every little exception and nuance of this law. And so I just want to, make sure that you know that this alone is probably not enough to make sure that you're legally compliant with it, but it should give you a great overview. And I'll be glad to answer questions as we go. So just kind of an overview on what is the Corporate Transparency Act, in case you haven't heard of it. It's federal legislation. It was enacted by Congress in January of 2021. And its intent is to really address money laundering, to prevent terrorist financing, corruption, tax fraud. So a lot of good things that it's hoping to do, but it is a big change for small businesses especially. And so the Corporate Transparency Act established this requirement for beneficial ownership information reports. BOI is often what you'll hear when you talk about these BOI reports or BOIRs. And these reports have to be filed with FinCEN, which is a Department of the U.S. Treasury Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Although the CTA passed in January of 2021, these reporting requirements just took effect this year, so January 1 of 2024. And the Corporate Transparency Act, it basically said that to implement that act, FinCEN was responsible for drafting two rules. So they had to draft the beneficial ownership information rule and also the BOI access rule to figure out who could access these reports after they're filed. And then they also had to amend an existing rule. So one of the big responsibilities of FinCEN is overseeing kind of the existing laws and regulations with the banking industry. And so the customer due diligence rule, or the CDD, is an existing rule that had some impact based on the Corporate Transparency Act. So they had to work to do that. So what I will do today is really go through the BOI rule, this first one here, beneficial ownership information rule, is the details of kind of what you need to do and how to do it. So first is the timing on when it's due. Reporting companies, and I'll define that. So reporting companies that were formed, meaning you registered with the Secretary of State prior to January 1 of 2024, then you have to submit your initial report with FinCEN by next year. So you have a year, January 1 of 2025, to complete this report. Any reporting company that forms, that's created or registered during the year of 2024 has 90 days after you receive notice of your formation with us to submit your initial report. This is one of those things where there's some specific language in the law about receiving that notice. So actual notice, or that you should be aware. So if we send you a letter or an email to let you know that your business has been approved, that's actual notice. But once we display it on our website too, which we do as soon as we approve it, that could be considered notice. So you want to look at that, but you have 90 calendar days if you form your business in 2024. Just to keep things, to keep you on your toes and checking your dates, there is another rule. So if a business is formed on or after January 1 of 2025, then you only have 30 days. So that was the original plan, was that this report would have to be submitted within 30 days of forming your business. There were some concerns with this being a new legal requirement, people not being aware, potential system issues, that 2024, they give that extra time, so 90 days. But once we hit January 1 of 2025, you're only going to have 30 days moving forward. There are also deadlines in the law about existing updates, correcting your reports. So it's not just you submit this report one time and you're done, but anytime the information on that report changes, or if you realize you made a mistake, there is another requirement that you need to file an update or a correction. And there's a 30-day deadline for those, and I'll kind of touch on that when we get to it. So the reporting companies, this is kind of that first question. So when I know this can be overwhelming and this is all new. And so you're thinking like, okay, do I have to do this? Do I not have to do it? The first thing you need to figure out is, are you a reporting company? And so FinCEN has defined reporting companies as an entity that's formed by filing a document with the Secretary of State or a similar office. And not in every jurisdiction do you file your business with the Secretary of State. So they use that language of or a similar office. So that means, at least for Ohio, entities like corporations, LLCs, limited liability partnerships, those entities do not legally exist until you register with our office. So those are all reporting companies. There would be other types, though, in Ohio that are not considered a reporting company. So examples of that would be a general partnership or a sole proprietorship. Those entities can legally exist without a formation document being filed with our office. So that's not considered a reporting company. And this is something that could differ by state. So some states do require general partnerships to register with the Secretary of State. Most do not, though. So it's not specific in the law, at least within the beneficial ownership reporting rule, about different entity types. That's where you have to look to your state and figure out if you're required to register or not. So I think it's helpful sometimes to like pause and think about these questions and what you need to ask yourself. So the first question I would ask to determine if this applies to you or not is the entity formed? So is my business formed by submitting a document to the Secretary of State? And if yes, then it might be a reporting company and I need to keep reading and considering this. If no, so if I'm a sole proprietor, then it's not a reporting company. And in Ohio, for any of you who have a sole proprietorship, but you've registered a trade name or a fictitious name, yes, that's a filing that you've done with our office, and it allows you to comply with the law that requires you to protect your business name, but you're not forming your entity that way. And so that's not a reporting company. Your sole proprietorship exists without that form. So then we would consider kind of the next thing, which is exemptions. So the Corporate Transparency Act lists 23 categories of entities that are exempt from reporting. So they would fall under that first test if, yes, they're a reporting company, but they're exempt from having to do this report. So this is a good example of how this presentation is not going to go over all 23 of those. But in general, these exceptions are entities that are already under strict regulation, most of them by the federal government, some state regulated. So examples of that: publicly traded companies, those are regulated by the SEC, banks and credit unions. Another big one is tax exempt entities. So this means that the entity has received its tax exempt status from the IRS. If the entity has their tax exempt status, they don't have to submit one of these reports. Insurance companies, public utilities, and then two big categories that I think are important are large operating companies and inactive entities. We get a lot of questions about those in our office. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about those. Large operating companies will protect a lot of big businesses, not many small and medium-sized businesses. This is how FinCEN defines a large operating company. They have to have more than 20 full-time employees. Those employees have to be in the US. They could have additional employees outside the US, but at least 20 full-time employees must be in the US. They have an operating presence at a physical office in the US. And then they filed a federal income tax return for the prior year, making more than $5 million in gross receipts or sales. You'll notice, especially by that third prong, and really the first two, that these things could change by the year. And so an entity might be exempt 1 year based on their gross receipts from the prior year, but then that status could change and then they're no longer exempt. Yes, I think we have a question.
On this, what if a company is, especially with COVID, we have a lot of online-based businesses. So how do they might have 20 employees, but they don't have that physical office because everybody's working remotely. How is that calculated into this?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and one that I've been hearing recently. So if it might be a case where someone, the president of the company, the leader of the company, is working out of their home, but they're really using that as their home address as their physical address. And that could meet the standards. But if they're using like a PO box address and they're really just all working online and there's no actual home location, that probably would not. And so one thing that I will include at the end is a link to the FinCEN FAQs. And I think FinCEN is doing a good job of addressing some of those questions and updating it as they're getting them. And so they add in the date that they've added the question and the answer. And so I would always recommend checking there. But this is more of the idea with these large operating companies is not as much, an online company, but something that has a physical structure. So it's likely that a business operating everyone remotely around the country will probably not meet this exception. And another question that we're getting a lot in our office is about inactive entities. And so there are many people who register an LLC and they don't actually start business, or someone who registers an LLC because they own their property in the name of the LLC. Or maybe they have, kind of consulting on the side and they haven't done any work recently. So this is, I think, if you fall into any of those categories, a good one to look at to make sure that that you don't have a requirement. But it only applies to entities that were formed prior to January 1 of 2020. So if you formed an entity 2 years ago and you just really haven't done much with it and you would consider inactive, it won't meet this definition. And then it's also looking at the revenue of the business and any assets. And so you couldn't have made more than $1,000 in the last year or hold any assets. But this is an exception or an exemption that could help you avoid filing. So now I'm kind of adding to some of these questions. Actually, Ambrose, do you have a question? I can address that first.
Yes. On the inactive company, could a company become inactive, or is that definition only for those that existed prior to 2020?
Yeah, that's a great question. They could become inactive. So as long as they were formed after 2020, after January 1 of 2020, they always have the ability to meet this exemption in the future. And so if the business, is kind of doing less work this year and next year even less, and then it gets to the point where they meet this qualification where they do not hold any assets and they haven't made more than $1,000 in a year, then they meet that exemption. And then maybe in the next year, suddenly they amp up their business again, and now they don't meet the exemption, and that's fine too. So this can happen with all reporting companies, and all of the exemptions is that they have the ability to go back and forth. Okay. And so that's going to be a piece that's important for businesses to pay attention to, is if they think, okay, I'm exempt, I don't have to do anything, you also need to make sure that you remain exempt.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. So I repeated my first question here. If they're legally formed by filing with the Secretary of State. So we said yes, then we're going to move on to the next question. Do I fall into one of the exemptions? Yes, then I don't need to submit a report, at least not that year. But if I do not meet an exemption, then I must submit my report. So then I wanted to talk about, well, what are you submitting? What do you have to provide to the federal government? Three categories of information. First is the company information. So about the reporting company itself, and then the beneficial owner information and company applicant information. So there are three categories of things that they will be asking for on this form. So the first, to talk about the company information itself, what's the name of the business? Provide any trade names or DBAs that the business is using, and a complete current address or the principal place of business. Also, the jurisdiction of formation. So, for example, if it's a corporation that was formed here in Ohio, you would list Ohio. And then the taxpayer identification number that's associated with it. This information can change. So if a LLC files an amendment with our office and they change their business name or they add a trade name, any of those things trigger the need to update your BOI report with FinCEN. They would also have to file the beneficial owner information, and I will define next kind of what that is. How do we figure out who our beneficial owners are? But once you've done that, you would need to file the owner's full legal name, their date of birth, their residential address, not a business address. It specifically wants their residential. And then information related to a identification card. And so if you would use your driver's license or passport, for example, you want to know what's the identifying number associated with it, what's the jurisdiction that issued that card, and then an image of the card. So if I use my Ohio driver's license, I need a picture of that. I would list Ohio as the jurisdiction and then my driver's license number. Similar information is needed for a company applicant. And again, I'll define that in a minute, who the company applicant is. But company applicant, the person who's submitting the form or directing the submission of the form to our office. This is only required if the business was formed on or after January 1 of 2024. So if you filed your business last year or 10 years ago, it doesn't matter who the company applicant is. But if it does apply to you moving forward, you're starting a new business, then you will need the company applicant information. Very similar information to the beneficial owner, their name, date of birth, the ID information. The only thing that's different is that this could be someone who's not connected to the business. It might be a paralegal at a law firm. It could be an attorney. It could be an accountant or someone at a service company helping you file the business. And if that's the case, they can provide a business address rather than their residential address. So that's one thing that is a little bit different. So it's a good question is to figure out who are my beneficial owners? Who are the beneficial owners of this business? And there are two prongs that they're looking at. One, it's someone who exercises substantial control over the business, or two, someone who owns or controls at least 25% of its ownership interests. And so we'll look at each of those and try to define that. There's a lot of information, a lot more information that you can get on the FinCEN website. And they are, I think, doing a good job of providing examples and scenarios that you might be able, if you really have someone that you're unsure of, you might be able to find a good example to help you figure out if they're an owner or not. So these are the categories. Someone with substantial control is probably someone who's a senior officer of the company. So the president, the COO, CFO, it depends on the structure of each business, general counsel. These are the people who are making important decisions, guiding the future of the company. So they would fall into that category of substantial control. Others are someone who has the authority to appoint or remove officers or a majority of the directors. Those are considered to have substantial control. Important decision makers of the reporting company. That's a little bit more general. And so that's something that really the business will have to figure out. And then there's a kind of catch-all language in there, any other form of substantial control. And so that's kind of based on different business structures and the way they're set up, that there might be ways where someone who doesn't fall into one of those top leadership roles, they might have substantial control over it. So those are unique, and I think we'll continue to get more and more information added to the FinCEN site that would help people figure that out. Ownership interest can be a little bit easier to understand, but that's basically you own shares of the equity stock, you have voting rights, another way that you have that percentage of interest. Ambrose, you had another question?
Yes, I have just a couple before you get too far,
Yeah,
far
absolutely.
down. Just want to go back. I think you were talking about the reporting company, and you're talking about the principal address. So is that a physical address, or what if they have a PO box? Let's say if it's an online company and they only use a PO box, because I
Mhm.
think in Ohio, LLCs are not required to like identify principal county, are they?
That's correct. So in Ohio, we don't ask for the location information for an LLC. We do ask for a city, county for a corporation, but we don't ask for the physical street address. And so if I think the requirement, I would have to go back to verify for sure, but I believe the requirement is that to give the physical address, if there is one, if they have a building, an established building, but otherwise I think that you can give any other mailing address associated with the business, but I would need to check to verify that one. Yeah.
Okay, okay. And then when you were talking about the company applicant, what if someone used a company applicant is the one who files, right? That's so what
Mhm.
if they use LegalZoom or one of the other online services? How does that work?
Yeah. And so I think that's something that we will see that over time I think will change maybe the way some of those companies are submitting the records for their clients. One thing that is helpful though is there's this option called the FinCEN identifier, where someone could apply. So they could, if I wanted to say I'm a paralegal at a firm that does a lot of business filing, so I would be listed as a company applicant on any filing that I help with. And so it's the person who's submitting it to our office or directing. So it could be two people. So it could be someone who is, if I am in a paralegal working for an attorney and the attorney's telling me, okay, I want you to add this information and then submit it on this day, and here's what I want you to do. They're really directing me and I'm just acting it out. So then it could be two people as the company applicant. So in those cases, they are not affiliated directly with the business. And so as a paralegal at a law firm, I might not want to share my personal information with the business who's required to do this. So I could apply for a FinCEN identifier, and I would go to the FinCEN's website and enter all of my information, and I get a number. And then I could just provide that number to the business. So when they're submitting their report and they have to enter who's their company applicant, they just give that number. It does give me this responsibility, though. Moving forward, I always have to update FinCEN if my information changes. So if my name and address changes, I need to update FinCEN on that. So that's a piece where I suspect people in those roles are likely going to go that route.
Wow. Yeah, when I didn't think about that part. So now
Mhm.
wow, that's a lot to track.
It is. Yeah, it really is. And it's things that someone might not realize if they're helping someone start their business. They might not be thinking that they fall into one of those roles, but it's possible. An argument can be made that you're the company applicant if you're sitting with a friend and helping to walk them through a form because you're more familiar with it. Are you are you directing them? And we're hearing a lot of questions too about beneficial owners if substantial control if you are not employed by the business, but you're a mentor or you're providing guidance to a business owner. So I think there still are a lot of unknowns, and we'll continue to see what FinCEN says and what kind of direction we get.
Wow, yeah, and I know you're probably going to address it as you get further in, but as we talk about this here, when you talk about the of keeping this information updated, um, there's those civil and criminal penalties. I'm sure you're
Mhm.
probably going to speak to it,
Yeah.
but would that apply possibly to updating even the company applicant type information?
So luckily, company applicant is just submitted once. So it's
Okay.
the information at the time that you do your initial report, and you don't, if you had a FinCEN identifier, you personally are responsible for updating it, but the business is not responsible for updating company applicant information. So that's good because they might not have any future relationship with their company applicants. But they do have that requirement for beneficial owners. So I will touch on that, as that's things that, the business needs to consider. How do we make sure that that information is up to date?
Thank you.
Yeah. So this is kind of the
I also
definition.
had a quick question
Yeah,
as well.
absolutely.
So, from us as educators, if we are kind of say doing this presentation, this PowerPoint, because you can't show up, you say, "Hey, Amber and Ambrose, can you deliver this PowerPoint education for us, module for me?" That doesn't make us that third party that would have to put our information in there, does it?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No.
Because we would want to
Yeah.
have like that education role, like, hey, here's the
Yeah.
information, you go
Mhm.
forth, here's the link,
Right.
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
We
Yeah, I
might,
mean, I think you're in a role where you're guiding people and you're helping and
yes,
giving them resources and connections, but
yes,
the way they've defined, and this is kind of the definition of what is a company applicant. It's the individual who directly files the document that creates the reporting company. So that could be the person who is walking it into our office and submitting it, or most of our filings are done online now. And so, we can see in our system who is the user who submitted it. That person is going to be a company applicant. But it's also the individual who's primarily responsible for directing or controlling the filing. And so I think that is more than just helping someone, showing them what form to do, answering questions about, what's required in each field, but really giving that direction, saying, this is what you have to put here. This is the name I want you to enter. This is the address I want you to use. So I think that's kind of taken to a different level. So there can only be at most 2 company applicants. In most cases, it's probably just one, but there can't be more than 2. And I think, and a lot of times small businesses, the business owner themselves might be the one who is the company applicant. And in other cases, it, would be a service company or a law firm who is working with the business owner to get that done. And this is the information that I mentioned on a FinCEN identifier. And I think that what we saw when FinCEN went live with their electronic filing system on January 1st, I forget the exact number, but it was a lot of FinCEN identifier applications were submitted on the first day. And the first day, I think, was it was a holiday. I think it was on a Monday, and our office was closed, but I was still checking because I knew the system was going live. And I think they had between 6,000 and 9,000 FinCEN identifiers issued on the first day that the system was live. And so I'm sure that was, the majority of those individuals were from service companies or law firms or accounting firms that do this in the course of their business, and they wanted to make sure that they were ready to go and had their number. And so it's sounds like, I have not done it myself, but it sounds like that piece of the system is pretty easy, that you can just enter your information and you get your FinCEN ID back. And so that way you can use that number instead of all of the information that's required on the BOI reports. So it's optional. Don't have to do it. I think obviously there are cases where that makes a lot of sense, but then they are required to make sure that their information is up to date. One of the questions that I'm hearing a lot, though, about FinCEN identifiers, especially from people who are, in this industry and doing business filings with our office a lot, is what do they do if they leave their job and they're no longer going to be doing that? There isn't an option to cancel your FinCEN identifier or to remove that number or anything like that. And so I think that's something we'll likely see FinCEN have to change in the future, because otherwise the law really requires you to continue to maintain that information with FinCEN, even if you're not going to be using that number or acting in that role. So that's something I suspect will change in the future. But I think this will be really helpful for people to have a FinCEN identifier. One of the things that we see and hear a lot in our office is about scam websites and misleading and deceptive letters. Unfortunately, a lot of our business filings after something is filed with our office, information is now public. Their statutory agent name and address is public, and we see people reaching out to them and sending them things and trying to take advantage of them in many cases. We have a section on our website, Protect Your Business, and we have alerts. And so anytime we hear of or get a copy of a misleading or deceptive letter, we're adding it there. We're trying to add information about misleading or scam websites, trying to collect your personal information. So I always recommend looking at that. But we know that this is something that, is likely to result in that kind of fraudulent behavior, because you would have to enter your personal confidential information. And so fraudsters are going to try to get that. And so it's very important to make sure you're on the right site. And so all information, all these DOI reports, the updated reports and corrected reports all have to be submitted electronically. There's a couple different methods. They're all on the FinCEN website. So fincen.gov, BOI takes you right to the section, and I'll have a picture of it too. But you can either do a web form process where it just kind of walks you right through. You're entering data as you go. There's also a PDF form option, so you can download the form, complete everything, and upload the PDF to their site. And then the third option is an API service. And that's where, if you were working with a service company, they could submit the report for you, and they might have been an approved user to have an API connection with FinCEN, and so they can submit the data electronically. So in most cases, if you're doing it yourself, you'll go through the web form or the PDF. Looking at it myself, I thought that the web form was pretty easy. I thought the PDF was a little bit harder to do. So on the site that I had on the prior screen, it will take you there, and there's a link to this. But here's the direct link just to this filing system. We have heard from a couple customers that they got confused because there are other filing options here too. So I circled in red the top box there, which is the beneficial ownership information reporting. And so you would click on that blue button for Get Started. The filing below is another reporting requirement that's due to FinCEN, and that's for the Bank Secrecy Act. So that does not apply here. You can also click on the left side at the bottom there, File BOIR. You can click there. So there are a couple options, but the Bank Secrecy Act filing is not what you need. So make sure that you're on the right site. You're not going through a third party that might be fraudulent. So I've mentioned a couple times you have to keep this information up to date. There's, it's not an annual report, but you could have other timelines and other triggers. So corrections, if the report was inaccurate when you filed it, then you must submit a corrected report within 30 calendar days after you become aware or you have reason to know the inaccuracy. And so maybe your initial report, you submit your beneficial ownership information, and one of the beneficial owner's addresses was wrong. And it could have been a typo, or some mistake like that. As soon as you figure it out or should know, and that piece I think is going to be hard. I don't have a better definition of having reason to know, but within 30 days, you need to make that correction. This also means if you submitted that initial report, maybe you listed 5 beneficial owners, but then really there were 6 people who fell into that category. As soon as you realize someone else is a beneficial owner, you need to submit a correction. But there would be times that you would need to update. The difference is an update is when something changes. So if you started with your 5 beneficial owners, but then someone else takes a different role within the company, and now they have more control that hits that level of substantial control, that's an update, that's a change. And so you must report that within 30 days of that change occurring. And that's also in a situation where one of your beneficial owners moves, and so their address changes or their name changes. And then this also applies to the reporting company information. So if the physical address of the business changes, the business name, any new trade names, all of that would apply. There is no requirement, though, to update the information about the company applicant. So that's provided one time on the initial report, and that's it. And then you don't have to worry about those changes. As Amber has mentioned, there are penalties, and they can be significant. So that's why our office is doing what we can to help educate and inform businesses. This is not state law. It's federal legislation. We really don't have any any control over this. We're not collecting this information, but we don't want Ohio businesses to be harmed. And so we want to do everything we can to point you in the right direction, connect you to the resources available to help you comply with it. There are civil and criminal penalties that are possible. And so a civil penalty could be up to $500 for each day a violation continues. And this really means that if you provided false information or you failed to provide information, you didn't report at all, you could be penalized $500 every day as long as you don't submit that report. Criminal penalties can include imprisonment up to 2 years and or a fine up to $10,000. So this is significant. And when we look back at that list of reporting companies and who are exempt, a lot of the exemptions are going to be bigger companies, often with their own either attorneys or internal legal staff who would help them comply. And so that means the reporting companies who have to submit this are probably small businesses, medium-sized businesses who might not have an attorney or someone to assist them. And so we will do what we can to connect those businesses with the help that they need to get this done. I mentioned at the beginning that there were 3 rules, 2 rules that FinCEN had to write to implement this Corporate Transparency Act, and then 1 that they had to revise. So this is the second one, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on it. This one just recently passed in final form at the end of 2023. And so this is the access rule. And so going back to kind of the first thing I said about what is the Corporate Transparency Act? Well, it's intended to prevent money laundering and terrorist funding. And so this was a big piece of, well, who can access that information? And it's law enforcement who's interested in it, that they are, they're the ones who need to know who's behind this business. Ownership information is not filed with the Secretary of State's office. So we get that request a lot, that people will say, well, this business harmed me, or, what can you tell me? Who owns this? Who's behind it? And we don't know that information. The only name that we maintain is the statutory agent. And the agent may or may not be someone who, is employed by the business. So the access rule is important. To make sure the right people are accessing it, but also to make sure that they're complying with the security requirements, because that is personal confidential information. Yes, the question.
We had a question from the audience. Are there any could you provide some examples of penalties?
Yeah, so a penalty, and we haven't seen any, no one's been penalized yet. So again, this just went into effect January 1. And so I don't know. I suspect early on there's going to be a lot of people not complying with the reporting requirements because they aren't aware of it. And so I hope that the initial step is not to go straight to penalties, but instead to educate the businesses and have FinCEN do some sort of outreach and say, it appears that you've not submitted this report. You appear to be a reporting company, either submit or, to explain why you haven't. So we don't know. So I can't give you an example of what's been done yet. But it could be, so for a civil penalty, $500 a day could be the penalty that the business would have to pay to the federal government. And so if you don't submit a report at all, and maybe you're a business that you were formed 5 years ago, that means you have until January 1 of 2025 to submit your report. And so you wouldn't incur a penalty until after that date. But they could do both. So they could charge you $500 a day until you submit the report, paid to FinCEN, but they can also have the federal government bring criminal charges against you, and the business owner themselves could be in prison for up to 2 years. Now that would go through a whole criminal process, and there's a fee that could go along with that of $10,000. So I certainly hope that doesn't happen. Unless it's a situation where, and what I would suspect is maybe a business is under investigation for some of these activities that they're trying to address, money laundering or terrorist funding. And this would be something that they could add on top of additional crimes. That would be kind of my guess and my hope with these criminal penalties and how they would do it. Okay. So
I had a quick question.
Absolutely.
Well, I guess it's a question comment. With respect to the penalties, in terms of just a quick review, I believe that there may be penalties associated with preventing or interfering with a reporting company, a reporting company's ability to provide accurate information as well, in another part of the statute, so that if the company is trying to get information from a beneficial owner who refuses to provide it, that beneficial owner may sort of incur some risk or exposure as well.
Right. Right. And that, to be a beneficial owner, this is now part of your responsibility, that you owe this responsibility to the business. So yeah, that's a good point. I didn't have that included in my presentation. So thanks for bringing that up, that, because if you're the business owner and you know that this person over here is one of your beneficial owners and they're not cooperating with you and the business can be harmed, it's putting them in a really bad spot. And so, yeah, the beneficial owner themselves can have some penalties as well. So right now, the way this language has worked, so this access rule again was released at the end of last calendar year. It allows a certain group of people to have access, and it's basically the federal agencies involved in national security, intelligence and law enforcement, FBI, Homeland Security. State law enforcement agencies would have access, but they need to have a court order to do so. The Treasury Department themselves. And so some of that relates to the Department of Treasury's access is similar to the access they already have right now under the CDD rule, so the Customer Due Diligence rule within the Bank Secrecy Act. So they'll continue to have access. In that way, it doesn't mean every employee gets access at the Treasury. That is something that they monitor very closely for security. Financial institutions might have that information as long as the company gives consent. And that, again, is all connected to that CDD rule because there's some overlap here in what FinCEN already oversees and does with the financial industry. And then there could be situations where a foreign authority might have access through the U.S., but we'll kind of see how that works and what they need to do to gain that access. So this, I think can be overwhelming that you're already in a situation, especially for new businesses. So a business that's forming this year or in the years to come, there's so much to be done. And all of us who have, started businesses in the past know that that's a really busy time. Where you're filing your business with the Secretary of State, you're opening a business bank account, you're going to the IRS and Department of Taxation, BWC, so many different steps. This is one more step that you have to do when you form the business, but it doesn't end there. And so as I mentioned so many times throughout this, is you got to keep it updated. You got to maintain that information. So part of it is a business needs to prepare kind of what's their procedure, what's going to be their internal process to make sure that they're keeping this information up to date. When I mentioned, determining if it's a reporting company, that's the first step. But then the second step is seeing if it's, if it falls into one of those exemptions and does it stay in that exemption? So always monitoring that test. And then collecting and then securely maintaining that beneficial ownership information. This might be easy if you're the sole owner of a business, but if you have 10 or 20 or 30 beneficial owners, that's a lot more complicated. And making sure that you have that information, and how are you going to know if they file, if they have a legal name change, or how are you going to know if they move? So, that's something that businesses will need to figure out. And then making sure that those reports, those updated reports or any corrected reports get submitted to FinCEN on a timely manner. There are considerations. I know that law firms and service companies are looking at that. So that impacts them from a company applicant standpoint, but also what is their responsibility for the clients that they have helped with starting a business? One, they could be beneficial owners if they have substantial control over the business. Two, they're all busy updating. I think many of the large firms did it, last year, updating their agreements with their clients to make sure it's very clear who's responsible for this. Is it the law firm, or is it the business owner themselves who's going to be doing this? So, I'll expect to see that shifting a little bit with law firms and what services they're providing. And I think just being very clear from the start, if you seek legal advice and starting a business, this will be something that will we'll be addressing. And I wanted to just kind of add, like, what are we doing and what's our role in this? And I've made it clear, I think, from the start, this is federal legislation. So it's not our requirement. We're not maintaining this information. We do foresee, I think, being some confusion and people thinking that they need to file it with us. So we're just making sure that documents that are coming into our office don't have this information included, because again, everything that we receive in our office gets put on the public database, and we don't want to display this information. So don't submit it to our office. We're doing what we can to educate and inform our customers. If you've filed a business with us recently, you know that you get a checklist on kind of your next steps. So this has been added to that. We have added a page on our website that has information and then also links to FinCEN. And we're also adding it to emails that go out if you file any subsequent documents with our office. If you do a change of address for your statutory agent, you get an email back saying it's approved. We're adding this information there. So anyway, we can reach out. So I've touched on these resources that are available. So I've listed a few here. One on our website. So if you go to ohiosos.gov, you can click on businesses, and we have a lot of resources there. But the bottom right of that page, it says the Corporate Transparency Act. And so that covers a lot of the material that I've touched on today, but it's sometimes nice to see in writing if you have more questions. But I recommend going to the FinCEN site. They have quite a few resources and in different formats. They have a video, they have the FAQs document, which I think is really helpful. There is a compliance guide that they have, and you can download the PDF from their website. It covers a lot of the information that's on the FAQs, and it has a lot more details on kind of unique scenarios. So that's a good place to look. It is overwhelming, I think, though. It's a 56-page document. It's not just this 3-page little guide on how to do this. It's a pretty detailed guide, but I think it's a good place to go. So if your situation is a little bit unique and you're not sure what to do, that's a place to go. FinCEN has a phone number listed on their site. I don't think they have live agents answering right now. So I think the contact us option appears to be the best method. So from their website, you can submit a question. It sounds like they are responding to those, and they're also adding those questions to the FAQ. So I strongly encourage that. There are always attorneys willing to help too. So if you have questions and you need some legal advice, I'm sure there's an attorney in your area who would be willing to help you. So that is my presentation, and I'm glad to answer any other questions.
Well, first of all, thank you.
Yeah.
I put the General Ohio Secretary of State website address in the chat.
Perfect.
Your CED educators that are here today, myself and Ambrose, I put our direct email addresses in the chat as well. And we have a few more minutes. So thank you for giving us this federal information. But can you speak to just generally some of the resources and things that you all do in the Secretary of State office for businesses? Because you all, honestly, I'm going to brag. Your website is user-friendly, and it has a plethora of information. It's easy to use, but a lot of people don't know that it's there. So can you just kind of give us a quick overview of some of the things that the Secretary of State is responsible for?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the basic function of our section is where, you come to us to file your business or to update or change your business entity. And then we display that. So the business search is available. And so you can use that to search for not only your own business, but other businesses by name if you need to know who's their agent. But it's really important. I always tell people it's like checking your own personal credit report. You want to check your business record frequently. If you have a business that you registered a long time ago, before 2012, or it's something you filed on paper, then we likely don't have an email address associated with your business. So there are options. If you go to our website, I mentioned that protect your business. There's a link. If you go to our webpage here, you have the main address here, and you click on businesses at the top. That takes you to our section of the site. And one is about business identity theft. And there's a link there to sign up for e-notifications. It's really important. One of the things that takes up a lot of my time and my interest is monitoring what's going on with fraudulent filings. cybersecurity. These are big threats to businesses, and it's just happening more and more frequently. And we're seeing these creative ways that fraudsters are going about this. And so, the biggest thing you can do to protect yourself is to sign up for an e-alert. So if someone updates or changes your record, you're going to get an email, and you can then click on a link in that email to make sure that filing is something that you approved. I think it is helpful to generally just kind of monitor what's going on with business names that are similar to yours. So the law in Ohio is that you can register any name as long as it's distinguishable from other names on our record, which means they could be very similar. The latest thing that I am hearing, and it heard about a year ago, and then many times since, is people are registering a name that is close to another business name, opening a business bank account, intercepting your mail, stealing checks that are being sent to your business, and cashing them into their own account. That's not always the case. If someone files a business name that's close, maybe they just like the name and they want to use it, and they're not going to be doing anything illegal. But it's important to kind of monitor that and see. They also could be someone who's going to go after your customers and try to steal your business. And although it was allowed for them to register the name, they can't infringe upon your business rights. So that's one thing. Is I would always recommend checking that page, the Protect Your Business page, looking at those alerts for things that you might see in the mail that you could fall victim to. The one that goes out every week, unfortunately, is a notice that after you file a business, someone will send out a letter saying that you have to get a certificate of good standing, and it costs $67.50, and to mail a check and fill out this form, and they'll get it for you, and they'll mail it to you in 10 days. You almost never need a certificate of good standing, but if you do need one, you would need it if you're going to register as a foreign business in another state. You can download it on our website instantly for $5. So those are important resources that we have available on our site. We always link to new legislation. So the box where the Corporate Transparency Act is now was previously about the last update with the LLC law. There was a significant change with LLCs in 2022. So we try to highlight that information there. We have business publications and glossary of terms and resources that I think are helpful in making sure you understand the business. And then we have the Ohio Business Resource Connection, where we're trying to put links to other groups that can help. So we're limited that we can't provide legal advice. We can't sit down with everybody and walk them through the filing forms. We can't tell you where to go for these grants and government contracts and all these other options. But there are so many great resources like this in Ohio. And so, we really encourage people to look at those sites that we have available. And search your business record. Make sure it's up to date. Make sure that your agent information is still good. It's a valid address here in Ohio. And that way you'll know that you're getting notification from us if there's anything that could impact or harm your business.
And then on one thing that we had mentioned in our conversations prior to the show was we were talking about name registration. And how is that different from you just registering your business? Because that's a whole separate process. So can you touch on that real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you were to form an entity that has to be, so a reporting company that has to be formed with our office to legally exist, like a corporation or an LLC, you have what we would call a formation document, articles of incorporation, articles of organization. And on that document is where you list your business name and the required entity word or abbreviation, LLC, LTD, limited. And that's going to protect your business name. So it's going to form your entity. It's going to give you that legal status as an active LLC in Ohio. And it's also protecting your business name. So no one else can use that name. It has to be distinguishable from your business name. But there are other times that you might need to do what we call a name registration, a trade name or a fictitious name, both done on the same form. And that's what most people think of as a DBA. So if you're a sole proprietor or a general partnership and you're doing business here in Ohio under any business name, anything other than your personal name, it has to be registered with our office. And so you're not able to protect that on a formation document because your general partnership or your sole proprietorship isn't registering with us. But you would submit that name registration form. It's only $39. It gives you that protection for 5 years for your trade name. And so you would also do that if you have an LLC or a corporation and you're doing business under multiple variations of that name. So if I'm ABC Incorporated and on my sign, I just want to put like the Apple Store, Apple's, something short, that's a trade name. That's a DBA. And so I need to register that. And it would be registered to the corporation. So the corporation itself would be the registrant of multiple names. So those would all be done on our site.
So another way you can potentially use that, and I'm asking, is like say you're a nonprofit, and a nonprofit, you come up with these different initiatives, and these are things you're going to keep, but you're kind of branding. So this can be a one way if you come up with that creative name to go ahead and register the name, even though everything is not, the program or initiative isn't fully built out yet, correct?
Right. Yeah. So you could do that and register it to the nonprofit entity, being the registrant of that. Now, one of the things the form asks for the date of first use of that name, and so it has to be a past date. Now, it could be the day before you file the form, but it does have to be a past date.
Okay.
And so that's something that you could do that. Other times you might do that as like a trademark or a service mark, but that really has to be, you can't do a trademark unless it's in use. So if you have an idea and you're working on it, but this program or this initiative hasn't really started yet, it couldn't be done as a trademark, but you could do it as a name registration. But down the road, maybe it's a program that you've been successfully doing for a few years. There might be a reason to consider the trademark for that.
Yeah. Okay. In the audience, are there any questions, any additional questions or comments, or even reflections? Feel free to just jump in.
Well, I screenshot everything on the phone from the beginning to the end. I've been taking notes, and she covered everything, and made it very clear, and this was very beneficial. Yeah, and I ain't got to ask you too many more questions, Amber, because she kind of.
Good to hear. Thank you.
And after, when we do the final version of this show, and like I said, it'll be posted on our YouTube channel. We also like, as a follow-up to the attendees, to be able to give copies of handouts. Will this PowerPoint be available that we can send out to them?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, good. So just email it to me, and then I'll make sure that everyone here gets a copy of it.
Thank you. Thank you. My memory.
And Ambrose, do you have any closing remarks, questions?
Just first of all, just thank you for sharing with us today. And I guess just to sort of note for folks and for anyone who views the recording, there is a lot, as you can tell from some of the information and answers provided by Allison this afternoon. There is a lot more involved with the CTA that's important for business owners and related parties. I guess we need to sort of have this other category to become knowledgeable about. And so do put in some effort to learn and seek the necessary professional guidance to help with that, because there are actual penalties associated with it. And it may not start happening right away, but at some point, it will start getting enforced.
That's right.
It's better to be proactive about your business.
Amen. I asked that question.
And Miss Allison, do you have any closing remarks, comments, or anything that you would like to say?
Just wanted to say thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I appreciate this partnership and all that you do to help businesses here in Ohio. So you guys have done great work, and so it's an honor to be speaking today.
Well, thank you. So this concludes today's segment of CED Office Hour Live, where we come online on Thursdays from 2 to 3 every week. And today's topic was Corporate Transparency Act and Beneficial Ownership. And if you have any questions, even afterwards, like I said, feel free to contact the Secretary of State's office, or Ambrose and I can also direct you, if we don't know the answer ourselves, to the reliable resource. So once again, just thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week. And this concludes today's session of CED Office Hour Live. Thank you.